Thank you all for coming. Probably it would be more relevant to talk about the Serbian student movement nowadays. Unfortunately, I'll talk a little bit about the, let's say, past 15 years in the Balkans, in Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then, as I'm approaching the end of this talk, I will touch upon a little bit what's happening in Serbia at the moment, even though the case is, as you can assume, not included in the book, since the book is the outcome of my PhD. This was my PhD dissertation turned into a book. Let's start from the context, right? The context is clearly a post-socialist one, and then on the left-hand side you can see the image from Belgrade, replacing the old socialist symbols with the new nationalist symbols. So you can see the Serbian nationalist symbol, which is 3 fingers, and you can see the other symbol of socialism. On the right-hand side, you can see this. This is just an illustration how the square of Marshal Tito is replaced by this gentleman by the square of Tito, the criminal, right? So the post-socialism is a widely researched topic, and unfortunately I don't have time now to go in depth, but as we go through the presentation, we'll see some of the main features of this context. So I started from 2 premises. So there was a domination of the post-socialist discourse in the region of former Yugoslavia that was mainly relying on 2 pillars, let's say. The renewal of ethnic nationalism and insistence on identity politics on the one hand, on the political side, and on the economic side, it was something that was framed as modernization, in the introduction of free market economy, which overlapped with a peak, let's say, of neoliberal turn. So if you simply analyze things logically, you can imagine how the neoliberalization looked like in the 1990s on the periphery of Europe. It produced impoverishment, mainly of the working class, and come about of a new economic capitalist class, of the new oligarchs, as some call them. So you had the process that was initiated in the late 1980s, throughout the 1990s and the war period, and absolutely in the 2000s, which is widening the gap between the rich and the poor. Usually we call this the period of transition from real socialism towards something that one might call predatorial neoliberal atmosphere. So the first premise is that the left social movements in former Yugoslavia made a radical discursive breakthrough. As you probably know, this is not the wave of protest and social and protest movement that had as an outcome the change of the system, but something happened. So there was a clear dominance of the post-socialist paradigm and discourse. So we are new nations trying to catch up, as Habermas was saying, the catch-up revolution with the developed West. That ended up quite on the contrary, as we know today in 2025. The second premise is that this breakthrough has something to do with the inflow of new critical ideas. So I'll be talking about 3 social movements, and you will see the case studies just in a second. The new generation of young people, mainly students, who were exposed at some point to the new perspectives, which brought them to some new positions from which they perceive and observe the social, economic, and political reality around themselves. There are 2 levels of analysis, individual and collective. So I talked to close to 40 activists across the 3 case studies. But I also analyzed the way in which discourses of social movements were formulated, right? So this linkage between critical thought and social action is nothing new, right? There are numerous examples throughout the history from the French Revolution onwards on how the critical ideas influence social and political activism. And I just put these two images as an illustration. As you can see, on the left-hand side is Jean-Paul Sartre, on the right-hand side is Marcuse, and both thinkers were quite influential when it comes to the student movement of 1968, and we all know how their ideas were operationalized by the student movement. On the one hand, Sartre and existentialism, on the other hand, Marcuse and the Frankfurt School and the whole critical theory that, let's say, that shaped the second half of from 1960s onwards, the intellectual thought, but also the direction of social activism, not only in Europe but also in United States and also other parts of the world. So there is nothing new about the linkage between critical theory and critical knowledge and social and political action. What I thought might be useful for the wider academic community is to research how that linkage functions. So we all more or less take it for granted that activists take certain ideas, they develop them, they contextualize them, and then they put it in practice. What I wanted to do is to see how this exactly works. In the, let's say, contemporary era, in a very specific context of the post-socialist former Yugoslavia across the three case studies. I won't bother you too much with theory because this might be tiring, especially when it's so hot. But I will just briefly say that my general theoretical framework was based or was placed within the field of sociology of knowledge. Which actually is the field in which we try to learn how does knowledge transfer functions. Usually sociology of knowledge from Mannheim and others try to understand how certain commonsensical knowledge is getting adopted in a given social and political reality, right? What I did, I tried to see how counter-hegemonic, so non-commonsensical knowledge is getting, is finding its way through and reaching the activists. And of course, I discussed a little bit and the issues of critical theory and hegemony, included in my analysis a bit of Gramsci. And then, of course, as I'm talking about social movements, it would be silly of me not to include the social movement theory, even though you will see later on when I asked activists which theory inspires them the most, I would say 0 people responded social movement theory. Most of them will talk about, some of them will talk about the classics from political theory, others will talk about philosophers, some will talk about political economists, etc. But that was a very painful finding, especially for the for the environment in which I did my PhD, which is Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence, with Donatella Della Porta and all other leading scholars in the field of social movements. That social movement work rarely makes any sense for the real activists. They don't read that much stuff from that we write, that I wrote in this book, for instance. And of course, I included this. So this is a cognitive approach, right? If we divide, roughly speaking, there could be 2 approaches. One is emotional side of the medal, and the other one is cognitive side of the medal. And so I discussed ideas and how ideas influence activists and activism. So this is a cognitive side of social movements research. I also paid a lot of attention to this relationship, again, between social movements and what Thomas Rochon called critical communities. So these laboratories of thought where intellectuals discuss ideas, so they can afford, they're paid to do it. And then they produce concepts, certain understandings and perceptions of reality that activists take over, but not uncritically, of course, and then they develop it further. And I mentioned Gramsci. there were a lot of so-called organic intellectuals who one could find among these activists who developed theories themselves. So, and then again, I dealt a little bit with the issues of diffusion, how ideas travel from one case study to another or from elsewhere to the Balkans, and also how they framed their discourses. Methodology, I used the epistemic discourse analysis, so I focused on concepts. So when I was analyzing their texts, their public appearances, protest events, etc., I focused on the way in which they use certain concepts in order to communicate their activist agenda, and I conducted 39 qualitative semi-structured interviews across the 3 countries. So the 3 case studies, the first one, let's go chronologically from the first one is Zagreb student movement of 2008-2009. It says knowledge is not commodity written here, which was the main slogan of the movement, which could be classified if we have to pick among the 3 who was the most clearly and most obviously a radical left-wing group. That was the student movement in Zagreb. Then I included Sarajevo's popular movement of 2014, and the group that's called in Serbian Ne davimo Beograd, or Don't Let Belgrade Drown, Belgrade's municipal movement. I put 2016, but their activities started some years before that, but let's say that 2016 is the peak of their activities. This is, as a matter of fact, the only group among the 3 which has become in the meantime a political party, so we can talk about the case of a so-called party movement. So the later developments are interesting also, but not included here in depth. So we can see some contextual features within which the 3 social movements acted. So the type of the movement I already mentioned, the student one, the popular one, and the municipal one. So structurally speaking, even though the 3 countries share a common post-socialist condition, they of course have their own specificities, the 3 countries, Serbia, Bosnia, and Croatia. In Serbia, of course, there is, at the time when I was writing, this was the most suitable term, authoritarian tendencies. I think nowadays we can clearly talk about the authoritarian condition. Then in Sarajevo, as you know, Bosnia is structurally quite a complex country within which it's very difficult to push forward anything that doesn't have to do with ethnic and national issues, and this is let's say a constitutional thing. And then in Croatia, I put that this is the most relevant feature of the Croatian case: strong anti-Yugoslavism and anti-communism. So among the post-socialist countries, this is a shared feature, right? This distancing from the socialist past. But then it's a funny situation that Zagreb pushed the left-wing agenda further than the others, in spite of the atmosphere in Croatia in which these are swear words, right? Anything that has to do with Yugoslavia. So there is an interesting thing, because I live in Zagreb. I work in Belgrade, but I live in Zagreb. And I noticed, and I lived there for more than 5 years, and I noticed they never, even in bars and informal gatherings, you would rarely find someone who would use the term Yugoslavia. So even if they talk negatively about it, they would use the term former state. And this is kind of the ignorant that usually, this is not the case, of course, with the activists, but this is how the hegemonic discourse functions. So there was an idea that this should be just put aside. Even if we criticize it, we don't even use the term Yugoslavia, but we use the term former state. Which state? We don't know. And it's a funny thing, I will tell you this. There is a basketball club in Zagreb, Cibona, and in their place where they play, Of course, the place is named after Dražen Petrović, one of the most famous basketball players from Croatia. And then there are signs of when Cibona won this championship or that championship. So from 1991, you will see the national symbol of Croatia, and it will be written the winner of the championship of Croatia. Everything before is said the winner of the national cup or the national championship without mentioning of which country, right? So, and this is just a fun fact. Epistemic discourses. So these are let's say the main concepts used by the three movements in order to criticize the dominant post-socialist transitional paradigm. So, and I divide, okay, I'll skip this. Sorry, because I don't have time. This is what I want to show. So in Zagreb you had a strong, they're the pioneers of the post-socialist critique of peripheral capitalism. I'd say they used a lot the term capital, which had been absent from the region ever since the 1990s. They reintroduced it. They criticized neoliberalism from the specific perspective of the former Yugoslav, let's say, periphery of Europe. And in this domain, they did the most. I mentioned the organic intellectuals. Really, Zagreb until nowadays is by far the most advanced when it comes to development of new critical theoretical insights. And the activists were champions of it. So I divided into front-running master frames and then supporting master frames, and you can see in Sarajevo, it was a popular movement, so it was there was no clear social base, so they had to use the most abstract concepts in order to catch all. So social justice played that role, and of course the strong influence of the post-war atmosphere. So this notion of dignity is something that was really strong in Sarajevo in 2014, dignity in terms of human dignity, but also social and economic dignity. And of course, transition, corruption, nepotism. And then in Belgrade, we had the typical municipal movement, so you can see that the concepts correspond to the nature of the movement. Commons, public good, participation, etc. And they were from time to time talking about these things from the perspective of the Yugoslav experience, the self-management, etc. So they didn't hesitate to include that as well. So I was wondering where the concepts came from. I mean, they used the concepts, the activist collectives used the concepts in order to criticize the post-socialist paradigm, but I was wondering where did it come from? What are the sources, the origins of these ideas? And then I said, okay, there must be some theoretical influences, but before that, there must be some worldview level influences. So in terms of non-theoretical factors that played a role. And then I discovered that that social class played an important role. Most of the activists came from the impoverished families across the three case studies. There was a strong subcultural influence among them usually. And this sense of identity and so-called otherness. What I mean under otherness. So once you establish a new ethnic national state, if you live in Serbia, it would be nice to be a Serb, right? Or if you live in Croatia, it would be better to be Croatian than a Serb. But the thing is that there were many people, myself included, who were coming from the so-called mixed marriages, ethnically mixed marriages, who couldn't fit any category, right? If your mom is Croatian and father Serb, or in my case, if your mom is Albanian and your father is Serbian, then you find, and your mom has a strange name, then you find yourself a bit lost. You don't, there is this sense of non-belonging, right? And then many among the activists who were active in these three social movement collectives were coming exactly from such families, where they early on understood that the new framework does not, they do not fit the new framework, right? And then it was a problem for them what to do and how to behave, right? So answering the question, who is an activist? And I will just give you an illustration for this, discussing the social class. NDB is short from Don't Let Belgrade Drown, so this is Belgrade. It mattered a lot that where people grew up. So one of the activists said that he grew up in rural milieu, surrounded by industrial workers and poor peasantry. Others grew up in the former industrial cities of the former Yugoslavia or the former state. And then they were eyewitnessing the process of deindustrialization and collapse of one's respectable economy of the socialist Yugoslavia. So they could see their parents losing jobs, etc. And then you could see my old man was a typical socialist worker, my mother was a housewife. I was a typical socialist kid, whatever that means. And then we come to this issue of identity and feeling of otherness. I just put the definition of identity politics. There were many testimonies, but this one was by far the strongest, at least to me. I'll let you read. So this is an interviewee who I knew before, but I didn't know this story. He's, I mean, if one is counting you know, putting the blood under the microscope, he is an ethnic Serb, right? But he never felt so. He always felt Yugoslav. After that, he felt Bosnian. And then Bosnia, especially, is full of such stories, where you know you have your younger brother killed by the grenade that came from the Serbian positions, right? Who held Sarajevo under siege, the longest siege after the Second World War, as you know. And then you go to school and you were called Chetnik, which is a bad name for Serbs, right? And then you find yourself in terms of identity, who am I? And how come that we ended up like this? And this, I mean, it's interesting that in Bosnia I got, when I asked them about the theory that influenced them, I got a lot of psychoanalysis, which doesn't come as a surprise, also taking the post-war context. But this is also, I mean, partially this is the, I mean, not this extreme, of course, but this is my story. Wherever I go, I'm not belonging, right? In Serbia, I am Shiptar, which is a bad word for Albanians. In Kosovo, I'm Shkija, which is a bad word for Serbs. If I go to Croatia, I'm again Chetnik. So you cannot find yourself if you have such background. And if you have been socialized and grown in anti-nationalist sentiment, you cannot find your place under the sun, at least not in the mainstream of these countries, right? And then there is this factor of progressive social habitus and subcultural influences. The city of Rijeka, for instance, in Croatia, or in Italian Fiume. There is a nice movie, by the way, that came out recently, Fiume o Morte, that won all the prizes about the Italian occupation of Istria. If you have a chance to watch it, please do. Rijeka has always remained anti-nationalist, much more than other parts of Croatia, let's say so, and has always remained more multicultural than other parts of Croatia, which is quite ethnically clean, quote unquote. So there were some activists coming from Rijeka, growing up in Rijeka, being ethnic Serbs from Rijeka, who did not who did not take this path of embracing Serbian national identity, neither Serbian nor Croatian, but kept in a way a Yugoslav national identity in a way that they embraced internationalism over nationalism, let's put it that way. The city of Tuzla in Bosnia is a similar case, right? And this activist told me, at the time actually I lived in the same house with this activist, and she told me that she didn't know about the differences before she came to live in Sarajevo, right? In Tuzla it remained, even during the war and after the war, it was way easier to, you know, not paying too much attention to ethnicity and religion than in other parts, whether a Serbian majority or let's say Bosniak or Croatian majority. So coming from these let's say lonely islands made an impact as well. So then I wondered, okay, so we know the background of the activists, we know which factors influence their, let's say, cognitive becoming. And then I wondered which theory is relevant for counter-hegemonic activism in the Balkans nowadays. Which theory corresponds? And this, I found this wonderful book by Lind from 39, Knowledge for What? Right? And I actually often wonder the same. What it is to which knowledge is relevant today? Is it only a contribution to the scientific community? And what's the purpose of it? Or it should speak to the social and political actors as well at the same time, and how to find this middle ground without reducing complex things, but also talking to the real people. Then I also analyzed a bit of diffusion, which could be institutional or non-institutional. You will see it in a second. And then you can just read the blue parts. So you can see the most relevant authors. For the municipalists, of course, David Harvey was widely read, but also in Croatia. And what was emphasized, you see that this activist, for instance, in the same sentence puts David Harvey and Hannah Arendt, who, I mean, if you want to be very theoretically strict, you cannot put the two together, right, in the same sentence. But what mattered to him, if I'm not mistaken, it was a he, was the appealing writing style. He appreciated the polemical kind of, you know, writing, and then he said, okay, I agreed with Harvey, I disagreed with Arendt on many things. On some things I agreed, but I was really into her work because you know, the literature talks to me in a way. It resonates with me. So I discovered, okay, it's a writing style. We should pay attention when we write our books and our pieces. How do we write them, right? Bourdieu was important mainly for Croatian activists and for some activists from Bosnia. And of course, Žižek was important. When I say Žižek, I mean actually they mean the early work of Žižek, the sublime object of ideology, which is more or less among the groundworks that connects Marxism and psychoanalysis, that connects Marx and Lacan. And for many activists, that was illuminating in a way. It opened the new horizons, whether if they were coming more from the psychoanalytic side or more from the Marxist side. They learned how the two branches of theory communicate with each other through Žižek and a couple of more authors, but he shows up most often. And then you can see the municipalist Jane Jacobs. She was quite influential in Belgrade. People were reading about her. They were using these expressions, eye-opening, right? Or I also introduced this. I mean, I didn't introduce it. It was already a formulated term, cognitive click, right? Something that is a window opener for you, that is bringing you to all other references and authors, right? And then channels of diffusion, how these ideas diffused. In the post-socialist context, mainly, I know that at my university, the leftist thing I could read about is John Rawls at the Faculty of Political Science in Belgrade. And I think more or less it's the same today, right? But then there were some non-institutional influences, subcultural influences. Even when channels of diffusion were institutional, they were mainly foreign. So there were some people going to the CEU in Budapest or Humboldt University, and they were getting exposed to some, new perceptions and understandings of reality of contemporary era, globally speaking, locally speaking, etc. And these are some, just some concrete examples. Okay, and then collective level of analysis, I wondered, okay, which factors contributed for such discursive performances or such discursive expressions to come about? It can be that these were only individual inputs, right? Collectivity is not a sum of individuals, it's something more than that. There are certain factors that influence whether certain ideas will come to the forefront or not. And then what I found the most relevant was that it was very important for the activist collectives, for social movements, to have previously established activist networks. The level of trust, as you can assume in every collective, is very important. Right? Social base, a clear social. This is why student movements always are in advantage to others, because they have clear social base. They have, starting from the infrastructure. They have their universities, they can occupy them, as students in Serbia are doing now. And they share this, let's say, habitus of university life. There were some external factors, I don't have time to go there. Also some, okay, this is a fun, it's a funny story. I asked them, one of them, how did they meet, I mean, regionally? And then his response was, George Soros connected us. And how is this possible? I mean, okay, if you want to read the testimony, it's very funny. But then I will explain you the context. Because until nowadays there is this, let's say, I call it a colonial, a colonial perspective on the periphery, that they need to learn something, right? They need to learn how to be democracies. They need to, and then there was a lot of money from invested by the different funds worldwide into learning the new generation how to practice democracy, right? And then I was one of the participants. They would pick and choose the progressive young minds, and they would bring them to the workshop and discuss deliberative democracy or discuss values of rule of law, transparency, etc., etc. But then, from time to time, it would be strange on such events because you don't. I mean, it's not the thing that you disagree with it. It's just that you are way more radical than that. I mean, it's a liberal story, and then they would often gather left-wing people who would make fun of the liberal concepts, right? And this is one of such stories. And it contributed to what they did good is that they put people from the region, from Yugoslavia, together. And this is how they met. I mean, this is how I met many of my friends and colleagues across the former Yugoslavia. So this is about activist networks. This is the story from an activist from Belgrade. And then in Sarajevo, this was missing. Because it was a popular movement, it was a sudden outburst of anger on the streets of Sarajevo and other cities across the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then the group who tried to channel it through, to kind of shape it, frame it, found itself in a difficult situation to, put all the pieces of the puzzle together, because that was so unarticulated that one could not do that easily. And then Croatian case was significant. I mean, they did a good activist networks before 2009, because in 2008, maybe some of you remember, there was a big heated discussion in Croatia whether Croatia should join NATO or not. Right? And some left-wing students were opposing this idea from the left-wing perspective, so not from the conservative perspective. And these were the first actions where they met, firstly 2008, and then they continued in 2009 with the Free Education for All agenda. Trust was very important. In Bosnia, it was very difficult again because there was no clear social base. The movement was popular, and the government was employing some people from the Secret Service to infiltrate the plenums, etc. So it was a high degree of distrust. In Zagreb, it was easier because it was a university, it was more controllable, right? In Belgrade was also high degree of trust. Social base, I talked about it. Okay. Okay, and then this is just a table where I say this case has a solid social base, this does not, etc. I won't talk about it too much. There is this, I mean, some people, especially from Croatia, were telling me, okay, deliberative democracy, we know, I mean, it sounds very nice, but it's tiring, etc. But plenums at the Faculty of Philosophy in Zagreb, 2009, even the most radical people would admit that this works to an extent. Because they had colleagues who would change their minds. I mean, you know the rule of the deliberative democracy, the central category is an argument. So it doesn't matter who we are, what's our ideological perspective or this and that. Let's measure the strength of the argument. And they, almost all of them, were telling me, really in our case, it functioned. It took us some time. It was tiring. Sometimes you get nervous, you get annoyed by the other. But then, you know, there was one of them telling me, okay, I bring up an argument, and then there was someone who disagrees with me, but who defends my argument even better than myself. Then there was an open process, like a flow was there. And then you see the why it couldn't function in Bosnia, and this post-war context. So there was the ground zero plan, the first plenum that they tried to organize to gather all the people from the street. And there were everyone on the street, from minors who stay in houses for kids without parents, to taxi drivers, to PhDs, doctors, lawyers, everyone were there. So it was just and then one of them told me, the first person who stood up to speak at the first plenum of Sarajevo protest, 2014, said that he spent 2 years in a concentration camp, that his wife was killed, and that his daughter went through something that he was ashamed of sharing among the people, which in other words means that his daughter was raped, right? And then she was telling me, the activist, you are trying to formulate an agenda, something solid, right? And then you have a first person who stands up, and it turned out that plenums were more a collective psychotherapy for the people, which was much needed. I mean, you cannot blame the people. It was needed. But it couldn't get politicized because you didn't have let's say, the structural or social tools to work on politicization. Okay, and these are some conclusions that I even mentioned before. So the outcome is not the new system, but the outcome is that they made a discursive breakthrough. Now we talk about it. Now you have way more critical voices in the public, which is something that was absent before in the early 2000s. I tried to make some theoretical contributions that say, okay, sociology of knowledge, trying to understand how the commonsensical knowledge gets established in a society. Okay, that's fine. But we should also understand how counter-hegemonical knowledge finds its way through. And then I tried, I at least tried to answer this question in the book. Social movements and knowledge, this term of cognitive liberation. Okay, this is... which theory matters to activists, mapping channels. Okay, we covered it all. And then this was supposed to be the conclusion, but then this happened. This is the picture from March 15th this year in Belgrade. And I'll just, if I'm not running out of time, do I have another 5 minutes? Then this happened in Serbia. Just close to 1 million people on the streets. The protest was violently interrupted by something. We don't know what. Arguably, it's a sonic cannon. Maybe you saw the footages how people separate. I mean, I was there. So yeah. Why? Because of the collapse of the Konopi and the train station, the city of Novi Sad, the second largest city in Serbia, that killed eventually 16 people. At first it was 15, but in the meantime another person died. The train station was. Why is this an issue? Right? It's a tragedy, and it happens from now and then in this and that part of the world. But what's even more tragical is that this railway station was reconstructed 6 months before this happened. Before that, in the dark socialist times, everything was fine. I mean, they reconstructed it in the 50s, and everything was fine. No one lost their lives because the rooftop fell on their heads. They reconstructed it. I think the company, the Chinese company, the Hungarian company, maybe the French company were involved in the. But then, obviously, someone did their job. I mean, in a wrong way, right? And then this served as a trigger for arguing I mean, we all knew that the government is corrupt, but this was just the top of the iceberg. These are just some repertoires of action. You can see the main slogan is "Your hands are bloody." So they try to frame it not as it's not a tragedy, it's a murder, right? Because of corruption. And at some point, all the faculties of all universities in the country were blocked. Which is, I cannot think of any other, even the student movement in Zagreb I spoke about, maybe up to 10 of the faculties in Croatia were blocked in the peak of the protest. So this is by far the most significant thing that has happened so far in Serbia, and I would say even in the region and maybe even beyond. I was a month ago, I was in Prague and I met a student from Novi Sad. It was a late May. And I asked him, what was the last time you slept at home? And he said December 8th. But I cannot describe you how, I mean, but he didn't, I mean, he was smiling. It's magnificent what they're doing. They're still doing it. They did this door-to-door campaign. They were walking across the country. They visited every single village because they organized protest events in different cities across the country. And they were not going by trains, cars, etc. They were walking, which made a crucial difference that now the polls are showing that the list that would be supported or compound of students is beating Vučić on elections by his terms. They were also trying to make this European campaign, European tour, biking. They couldn't walk to Strasbourg, but there was this tour to Strasbourg. Also, some of them were running to Brussels. They were welcomed by the Serbian, but also former Yugoslav diaspora. It happened here in Vienna also. So they apply a range of repertoires that simply work. They resonate with people. Authorities' response was quite violent, and the thing is, usually people ask, what's the level of police brutality? Nothing special. I mean, the level of police brutality is way higher in Western Europe than in Serbia. So you won't find, if you see footages from, I don't know, Berlin or Paris or elsewhere, you will see that police is really brutal towards certain activists of different kind. But in Serbia, I mean, one would expect authoritarian ruler to beat up his citizens. No, at least it's not the job of people in uniforms. It's the job of civilians, which is even more spooky. Because people in uniforms usually have some limitations. I mean, if they cross their jurisdiction, there is some ethics or some rules. So you cannot kill a man in the middle of the streets, or if you do it, you will go to court. These are kind of guys that show up, as you can see on the left. I don't know, should I play this video? Maybe I should. So the girl is fine. Just for you to, the girl is fine, but this is one of the, it happened dozens of times. So people were blocking the street, staying 16 minutes silent for the 16 victims from Novi Sad, and then they would send these crazy drivers. So this is what's happening, right? So they just hit people with cars. And then talking in the regime media that these are just angry citizens who want to pass, right? It's not the case. But in spite of it, there was a cathartic thing happened. Yeah, on the left-hand side, you can see a student from the Muslim, from the region where most Muslims in Serbia live. It's called Sandžak or Raška Oblast, it depends. And then for the first time, this region has been included in the affairs of the country. So you can see the Serbian national kind of, how you call it, kapa, hat. And then you can see a Muslim student from the University of Novi Pazar standing side by side. For the first time, you could see students from this Muslim majority cities carrying Serbian flag. This wouldn't happen ever before in 3 lives. So in a way, students achieved this kind of merging of all the people, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, etc. And you had this speech of the war veteran who participated in the siege of Sarajevo in 1992, 1993, in front of the blocked building of Serbian National Television. And there were some students from Novi Pazar who came to replace their colleagues because it was, how you call it, a big Friday, just before Easter, right? Or Big Friday, or Good Friday, sorry. And they came to replace their colleagues of Orthodox religion who might be celebrating Easter, right? And the war veteran, so who was wounded and participated in the siege of Sarajevo on the Serbian side, said that the Serbian National Television has been lying people ever since 1991, 1992. And he asked the students not to follow what's happening on Serbian National Television because his generation was fooled. Don't let, you shouldn't let be fooled, right? And then he said, and let's welcome our colleagues from Novi Pazar with Selam Aleikum. And then you had, the Occupy kind of repertoire where you say something and then the crowd repeats it, right? It was a similar thing. And then in the center of Belgrade, 2025, I don't know how many thousand people just said out loud, Selam Aleikum, as greeting their colleagues and their fellow citizens from Novi Pazar, which was unimaginable, literally unimaginable 9 months ago. And I wrote something about it. I wrote for New York Times and Jacobin in this, as you can assume, New York Times is a bit more mainstream, explaining to the ignorant Americans what's happening in Serbia. The Jacobin one is more geopolitical, answering the question why Vučić is still supported by the West. They just support him. So I was talking about some business ties, etc. So I haven't written any academic